Welcome to the France 24 debate. Tonight, the United States on the brink, perhaps, of a historic change. The revulsion after the latest school gun killing still shocks the world, but it's all being rammed home by the remarkable response of the children who survived. Now, they are planning to march to Washington to demonstrate the need, as they see it, for change. Against this, the traditional response of the gun lobby, who point to the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution and the right that this enshrines for everyone to bear arms. A president who's repealed laws that made it more difficult for the mentally ill to buy a gun, and a gun lobby that shells out millions in payments to congressmen and women to buy their support. Some of the biggest names in US politics are quite literally on the take from the National Rifle Association. But this massacre seems to have made more impact than the others, remarkably, because of the eloquent voices of the youngsters calling for change, blaming the politicians for allowing guns to be so easily available. So could we be at a turning point in American history? Could this be the gun massacre that finally convinces Congress and President Trump that this is time for a real change? Or will the personal interests prevail? Will the cash of the gun-toting National Rifle Association continue to talk loudest on Capitol Hill? There's much to talk about. Our guests of this debate are, and this is in no order of preference because everybody here is equal, Craig Capitas, editor-at-large, TRT World, and Floridian in Paris. Good to see you, sir. How are you?
Good.
Always a pleasure to have you on board. On the other side of our studio, Vanessa Biard-Scheffer, member of Republicans Overseas in France. Thank you very much for being with us. Feel free at any stage to contribute and have your say. Joining us by satellite from Melbourne in Florida, Paul Violis, who's security analyst at the Violis Group International. Thank you, sir, for being with us. And can I extend my welcome to you? You are afar, but no more desire to be in this debate, and your voice very important. Feel free to contribute, sir. Feel free. By Skype from Atlanta, yes, Georgia. No problem. Mark Rosenberg joins us there, President Emeritus at Task Force for Global Health. Mark, thank you for being with us. And like I say to everybody here, feel free to contribute as soon as you want, anytime, any place. Let's start, before we bring in our guests, with outlining the facts. 17 pupils and staff shot dead by a teenage gunman who was known to the authorities. The second biggest gun massacre since, well, just 2012. Let's hear more now about the reaction from the students who survived, and a reminder, again, of what took place in Florida's Marjorie Stoneman Douglas School.
Another young victim of American gun violence is laid to rest. 14-year-old Jamie Gutenberg was buried in Parkland, Florida on Sunday. It has become a sadly familiar routine in the United States. But this time around, the affected students are demanding action from politicians. They've planned a March for Our Lives rally in Washington, D.C., with similar demonstrations planned elsewhere across the country.
March 24th, in every single city, we are going to be marching together as students begging for our lives. This isn't about the GOP, this isn't about the Democrats, this is about the adults. We feel neglected, and at this point, you're either with us or against us.
This isn't about any of the things we've been hearing.
The students are singling out politicians who have accepted large sums of money from the powerful National Rifle Association, a pro-gun lobby.
You know, the NRA are too busy giving money to politicians instead of giving money to the schools and make these tragedies not happen again. So, no, it's not about more police. It's not putting a SWAT team. It's not putting metal detectors. It's not about that. It's about, you know, changing the gun laws.
Though some Republican senators have suggested they are open to removing guns from dangerous individuals, others insist the problem is the person, not the weapon.
I have individuals in my neighborhood that own an AR-15. That doesn't make it a dangerous neighborhood or them dangerous individuals. It's the individual themselves becomes the issue, not the weapon that they're holding.
While Donald Trump has remained relatively silent on the escalating gun control debate, he blamed the FBI for ignoring warning signs about the shooter and spending too much time on the Russia investigation. The White House has said the president will hold a listening session with students on Wednesday.
Aaron Gunky with that report. It's hard to be on the fence with this one, as I'm supposed to be as the moderator. I'm from the UK, a place where people can't just get guns as a matter of process. But, of course, the United States has something enshrined in its constitution, in its very being, that allows people to have access to their weapons. So let's take it from there and bring in our guests to talk about the situation. Craig, may I start with you about this situation there? Now, clearly, 17 children have been killed. It is an horrific state of affairs. What is the solution?
You ban what they call semi-automatic weapons, which is a misnomer because that semi-auto state is what you use in combat. You never use the auto state. This is the biggest charade being pulled on the American public. It's a semi-automatic weapon. No, it's not. This is a military-grade weapon. When you fire it, it's not like a pistol, which leaves like a little knife wound. It leaves a giant hole in you. You ban them. You ban them. I don't care what age. I hunt. You don't need them. I've been in combat. They keep them on semi-auto. It looks good on TV with a full auto. Everyone thinks that's a lot of fun. And let me tell you, I don't know how many people on this panel have fired military-grade weapons, perhaps some of them. I have. There is really no friggin' difference between firing an AR-15 or its military equivalent on full auto or semi-auto. It's the biggest con job ever pulled on the American public.
You're saying, in spite of the fact that you hunt, you use a gun for that, you would ban these semi-automatic weapons. That's your clear situation.
Absolutely.
Craig, thank you. Vanessa, may I bring you in? Vanessa from Republicans Overseas.
Yeah. What I think is, effectively, what happens is that there's not more mass shootings now than in the past, but the casualties and the number of people killed is impressive. And there's a problem with the kind of guns you can have in the U.S. right now.
It's shocking, the figures involved, isn't it? I mean, obviously, just 17 people killed in a school.
It's always shocking if it's 1 or 20 because it's someone who's been killed by somebody else. The question that I will ask is, why is it that our society is so violent? Because if you take France or the UK or Europe in general, we have very strict gun regulations, and still we have mass shootings in a different form. And these people get guns, or they simply crash a car into a crowd. So the question more generally is, why is it that our society is so violent?
So you wouldn't ban semi-automatic weapons, automatic weapons? You'd be happy with people walking around with this kind of big military-grade weapon?
I think I will take the issue differently. I'd say, yes, automatic weapons we don't need. I mean, this is far-fetching, and probably because we're mimicking what's going on in Hollywood and what we see in the movies, where guns are glamorized, violence is glamorized. But on overall, I will ask myself the question, why is it that a country where there's no very little gun regulation, and a country where there's very strict gun regulations, you got the same issue and the same problem with mass shooting and mass murder?
It's the people, not the weapons. That could perhaps sum up what you're saying. Agreeing with the man we heard in our report, it's the people, not the actual
It's the people and the society. It's the individual and the society together.
Thank you very much indeed. Paul Violis of the Violis Group International, security analyst. Sir, is having a weapon of this kind, an automatic weapon, a military-grade weapon, is it necessary for people's so-called security?
No. No, absolutely not. And I agree with what the gentleman said earlier, in part based on some of the content that he raised. What your viewers need to understand is, and this is very, very important, is the founders of the United States Constitution, when crafting the Second Amendment, did so with the intent of allowing the militia, at this time, hundreds of years ago, to protect their homesteads from invasion. That has grown to be quite elastic over the last couple of hundred years, how we've interpreted the Second Amendment in the United States. Now, I understand also there's the debate about, well, if we take back the guns. It's really unrealistic to think you're going to put the genie back in the bottle in the United States. You can change legislation right now all you want. It's not going to take back the guns that are available. There's no question about that, and there is absolutely no legislation that's going to be implemented that's going to change that. You also alluded earlier about the power of the lobby, and that really is the biggest issue here, is lobby and legislators, and it's an issue that closely needs to be examined. So when you think about the issue of gun violence in the United States, one has to be astute to understand it's a multidimensional issue that has to be approached in a variety of different ways, but one in particular. And the key word in dealing with this is foreseeability. School violence is foreseeable. It was foreseeable in this particular instance. Law enforcement, unfortunately, dropped the ball. I don't normally like to say that, but it is what it is, and you got to call it the way it is. They dropped the ball. And this particular kid, who is not a sociopath, he's screaming for attention. He did so for about a year prior to the shooting. And the bottom line here is it could have been prevented. Again, multidimensional. Yes, it's a gun issue. Yes, it's a mental health issue. Yes, it's a school security issue. But at the end of the day, it comes down to foreseeability.
So, Paul, the authorities should have acted.
This particular crime in the United States is foreseeable.
Okay, so
there's no question they should have acted.
You're blaming the authorities. You're saying the authorities should have stepped in and done something with this teenager.
I'm not saying that the FBI and the Broward Sheriff's Office are completely complicit. I am saying that they dropped the ball with respect to not responding and investigating this kid and not making sure that the proper channels were traveled here from an investigative standpoint to ascertain and to crystallize just what type of threat this kid presented. He screamed at it. He told everybody about it, and clearly law enforcement dropped the ball here.
We've seen the clips on social media. We've seen what people have said about him, heard what people have said about him. Thank you, Paul, very much indeed. Your thoughts provoking some reaction here in studio. I'll bring in Craig and Vanessa to talk in a second after we hear from, by Skype from Atlanta, Georgia, Mark Rosenberg of the Task Force for Global Health. Mark, give us your initial thoughts, your take on what's happened and what should happen next.
Well, I think part of the problem here in the United States is that we are so polarized. No one wants people to be killed in schools. No one wants their children or grandchildren or brothers or sisters to be murdered in movie theaters or concerts or shopping malls. No one wants young black men to be slaughtered in our inner city areas. People don't want that, but we're stuck. And we're divided into two poles. On the one hand, you have those people who are very much for gun control, but the other side sees them as wanting to suck up all the guns with a giant magnet in the sky, take away all the guns out of civilian hands. On the other side, the people who are for gun rights are seen by the people on the left as gun nuts who don't believe that guns hurt people. These misconceptions, and it's been put forward by the NRA, saying that if you so much as discuss guns or you do any research on the subject, it's going to lead to all of you losing all your guns. And it's not true whatsoever. We can find out what works to do two things. There are things that will work to reduce gun violence and at the same time will protect gun rights. If we take guns out of the hands of people who have criminal convictions, felonies or domestic violence misdemeanors, that would be very good. How do you do it, and will it work? We don't know, because in this country, the research was all stopped. Starting in 1996, this research was being done at CDC to find out the answers to 4 simple questions that still elude us. The first is, what's the problem? How many people, where, when, how, with what weapons? What are the causes? And what works to prevent it? And how do you do it? If we can answer these 4 questions, we can find the things that work both to protect gun rights and to reduce gun violence. But we are stuck, and we need to get the politicians evidence on what works and what doesn't work. If we don't have that evidence, people can yell and scream on both sides. People can say that taking away semi-automatic rifles won't prevent mass shootings because it didn't do it when we had a 10-year ban in this country.
Mark Rosenberg, I need to interrupt you because time is against us in this first half of the programme, but I'll bring you back in for part 2 when we give, well, basically all 4 of you free rein to give us your opinions and debate this issue regarding guns, President Trump and the situation in the US in the wake of this horrific shooting at the school in Florida. You're watching the France 24 debate. Please stay with us.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information. Everywhere, in all situations, on every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24, 24, a different take on the news.
24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, 24, I'm Sarah Morris and I'm France 24's correspondent in Madrid. I'll bring you the latest news on Spain and Portugal, two countries battling to leave behind years of austerity. Join me live and check out my reports on France 24 and France24.com.
Sarah Morris, one of the 160 France 24 correspondents around the world.
France 24, 4 news channels in 4 languages, 430 journalists, 35 nationalities, 160 bureaus around the world, a global reach. 340 million households in over 180 countries can watch France 24. 55 million viewers watch the channel every week, and the numbers are constantly growing, with audience figures up by 31%. France 24 Online is also forging ahead, with over 18 million visits a month on France24.com. With 40 million videos viewed online, France 24 is a leader on YouTube, while our 35 million Facebook and Twitter followers make us France's #1 channel on social media. To our constantly growing community of viewers, thank you.
Welcome back to Life in Paris. These are the main world news headlines. Bashar al-Assad's troops are about to attack at Afrin, an escalation following Turkey's border incursion against the Syrian Kurds. Oxfam makes public its report into sex abuse by its staff in 2011, a bid to deflect damage caused by the sex scandal involving its aid workers in the earthquake zone in Haiti. A Russian athlete is caught doping in the Winter Games. The curling bronze medal winner could now be stripped of his medal. He'd taken the same substance as tennis star Maria Sharapova back in 2016. Welcome back to the France 24 debate. Tonight, the United States perhaps on the brink of historic change. Our debate, Trump, firearms, the school massacre survivors marching on the White House. Our guests for this debate, Craig Peters, editor-at-large at TRT World, a Floridian in Paris. Good to see you, sir. Vanessa Biard-Scheffer is a member of Republicans Overseas in France. Thank you for joining us too. Joining us from afar, but very much part of this debate, we have two men, Paul Violis, who is in Florida, security analyst with Violis Group International, and Mark Rosenberg joining us by Skype from Atlanta, Georgia, Professor Emeritus at the Task Force for Global Health. Before I let our guests loose, let's take a listen to what the students in Florida want to stop the mass shootings. And they say they want stricter gun laws, hoping to achieve what adults before them couldn't. One remarkable young lady we've heard from in the news over the past few days, Emma Gonzalez, she says they are a generation taking a stand on social media and on the streets. She says she thinks the kids can make a huge difference.
It's a shame, but I think it's kind of fallen on the kids to take care of this one. We're the ones who have to make sure that the cogs are greased, and we have to do the greasing now because we're left with the oil can.
What year were you born in?
1999.
That was the year of the Columbine shooting.
Yes, I've never known a world without a school shooting, without a mass shooting.
Incredibly sad words there from Emma Gonzalez. And we wait to see, of course, as more and more people who survived the shooting make their voices heard. And it is remarkable what they're saying. Some of the things they put onto social media, for instance, have really brought this massacre very much into our own experience, because of previous ones, it's all been reported almost third hand. But when you see, for instance, someone putting on a social media what they've lived through, it makes the impact all the more immediate, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you know, I remember the bomb in the RERB in Paris in '95, and I remember the bombs in Paris in the '80s. And at that time, we didn't have any social network, and we kept our sadness and our guilt within ourselves. So it's a change of society where you can express whatever.
But in the US,
happens.
when there's a massacre, things get forgotten in 2 days. Traditionally, that's how it works. I mean, I've worked on these things so many times. It gets forgotten. You know, people just move on. With this one, because of what people have seen, they're living it too.
I'm not sure that in a couple of weeks or a couple of months we're gonna hear about it so much. I think we're getting used to having mass shootings, and it's terrible to say, but one piece of news replaced the other.
March 24th, though, these kids are going to march to Washington. That's when it'll be back in the public eye. Craig?
I have to take serious exception with Paul. He called this a multi-dimensional problem.
That's Paul Violis in Florida, yeah?
Phooey. this is a multi-caliber problem, and it has to do with muzzle velocity. As far as this nonsense about the Second Amendment, about a militia, the reason they wanted a well-regulated militia was because the American government didn't have the money for a full standing army, and they were worried that they couldn't get it. On top of that, at that time, just perhaps 3 or 4 decades, 5 decades prior to that, the muzzle or the flintlock was invented. Now, that is solid, accurate history. And it is incumbent upon America's leaders to tell the country about this history and why it's like that. They haven't been able to do that, as Paul said, because of the National Rifle Association. Now, make no mistake about it. The NRA is not a gun owner's lobby. It is a gun industry lobby. And there's a big difference. I have been a member of the NRA, unbeknownst to me, since the age of 9 years old when I went to military school. I brought 2 documents to prove this. At the age of 9, I was certified as a junior pro marksman.
So they are diplomas from the National Rifle Association.
Yeah, that's right. Here's another one.
Pertaining to your ability as a marksman.
On an automatic weapon, on a single-shot carbine. Okay, we also learned how to fire 50 caliber machine guns at the age of 9.
I feel safe here.
So
don't feel safe. You should be scared to friggin' death.
So how do you feel about the NRA giving all the money to the Congress people in order to keep the laws from changing?
Because what the NRA does is they inflate their statistics by saying that people like me are members. When I'm in the States, I go to a shooting range because I enjoy shooting old 19th century handguns, Colt Armies, the 45s, you know, the history of that. You go there and you have to put in your address when you go to the shooting range where you're staying in the States, even though I live in France. Immediately, within days after that, I get more material from the NRA, essentially telling me that I'm a member of the NRA and asking if I want to contribute. So I have, since the age of 9, been an unofficial member of the NRA.
And you're saying that basically they're using you to bump up their figures?
It's the biggest con job, and they give money to both the Republicans and Democrats, and anyone who takes any more money from these people should be, drawn and quartered out of town.
Okay,
and feathered.
It's a disgrace. Politicians in the States taking money. Paul Viollis, let's bring you in because Craig was naming you. I wouldn't say naming and shaming. It wasn't like that. He was picking up something you said, sir. In terms of what we're seeing, in terms of what this massacre is, it is clearly shocking. It is clearly horrific. And I was trying to make the point that because it's been portrayed on social media in such a vivid way, with clips that children themselves filmed on their mobile phones of what was happening, it's going to make it all the more present in people's minds. Would you agree that this might help the children to get what they want, to see the changes they want?
No, I don't agree. And
so
to
people
Craig's
just
point,
they'll forget about that completely.
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's not what I said at all. You asked me a question, I answered you, and I asked and answered. So I'll tell you what I mean. First of all, to Craig's point, he's a United States military veteran, so as far as I'm concerned, he'll always get the utmost of respect from me.
No, I'm not a veteran. I just went to military school, and I ran from Vietnam as fast as I could.
Go ahead, Paul, go ahead.
Fair enough. Then I retract the respect I was going to give you. So when you talk about your question, when you talk, your question to me is what the kids doing. First of all, I applaud what our young adults are doing because they're voicing their constitutional right of freedom of speech, and they're electing to do something positive and productive to move forward and voicing their concerns to the United States government. That is their right in this country, and I applaud what they're doing. However, the reality of this situation is, for all your viewers to understand that in the United States, school security is not handled by the federal government. It's handled by state governments. It is up to legislators in each respective state to make sure that they craft legislation and fund properly school security. Absent that, then it's simply not going to get done. That's all there is to it. You can't change that. That's how it's done here.
So there need to be more guns on school campuses in order to protect the kids. Is that what you're saying?
No, absolutely not. And what I said before, and I'll reiterate again, I have been working as a behavioral analyst for 35 years. I have worked over 200 school violence shootings in my career, hands-on. I will tell you unequivocally Every single one is avoidable because the individual that pulls the trigger is not a sociopath. It is a kid that is looking for attention. The behavioral profile 35 years ago is the same one we're looking at today. The violence continuum is the same one we're looking at today. We are dropping the ball in getting this mitigated preemptively. End of story.
There are more guns present on the streets than in people's hands. Surely the availability, Paul, thank you. I'll bring in Vanessa here. Surely the availability has got something to do with this. I mean, you know, I'm just going to say you're expecting your first child. Yeah. People may notice that you are with child. You want your child to go to a safe school. Well, I presume you don't have people standing guard with guns.
But you know what? I'm afraid that even without guns in the country, we still have violence. And that scares me. Because I think in overall, this kid that should 17 or 20 people, if you look at his profile, he lost his mother, I think, in November. He lost his father a couple of years before.
There's something what Paul was saying, yeah.
His profile is very specific, yet there's only 4 or 5% of very mentally disturbed people. So we can't make decision about just because there's a minority of people.
No, let me finish. You cannot buy a beer.
Sorry.
You cannot buy a beer.
Excuse me.
When you're 18 years old, but you can go out and get a military grade
I'm sorry.
weapon.
I didn't interrupt you.
There's something elementally wrong with that.
Craig, thank you.
Wrong.
Just let Vanessa finish. Let her finish.
I did not. I'm sorry. I
Paul,
didn't
thank you.
interrupt.
Go ahead, Vanessa. Go ahead. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul.
In some situations, you need guns, like in the south of France, like in many families in the U.S., it's the same. You have guns because you go hunting. I mean, there's situations you need them. What I'm very scared about is that guns or not guns, we have a problem with the society. How we deal with mentally disturbed people, how we deal with each other with more kindness and more respect. And I don't think the answers that these kids are requesting or the NRA is requesting are the answers to properly handle these cases.
Mark Rosenberg, have the kids got the right idea? Are the kids doing the right thing?
I think the kids are doing wonderful things. They're courageous, they're articulate, they're informed, and they're not enough. I applaud them for what they're doing, but I've seen too many mass shootings and seen the problem go on too long to think that protest marches by themselves and articulate voices by themselves are going to solve it. I also want to add that school shootings are a small part of the gun violence problem we have in the United States. 2/3 of all gun deaths in this country are suicides. They don't, by and large, occur in schools, and they don't occur with AR-15 semi-automatic weapons. So while taking away the sale of automatic weapons and semi-automatic rifles may decrease mass shootings, while they gather the most attention and are horrendous in themselves, are not the bulk of the problem that we live with here. We need many different ways to solve different types of shootings that occur. And we need to work on testing what's going to work. It's good to say ban these rifles, but we don't know that there's not going to be another way to do mass shootings. And this is one area where we are trying to proceed blind. We don't know what works. We don't know what's effective. We don't know what's safe. We don't know that arming all the teachers in a school is even safe, or having armed guards in a school is safe. We need to test these out. We need to know what works and what doesn't work. That's how we're going to start to make progress.
But is the reality that testing process is something that happens as you go along? You can't just suddenly test it in isolation, can you?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Please tell us.
We stopped testing. We stopped the testing.
They pulled the money from the CDC.
We started to look at the CDC doesn't get money for this, and people have stopped CDC, but they can restart. And the Secretary of Health and Human Services just last Friday said it's time to restart the testing. We need to find out what works and what doesn't, and we can. For a long time, the NRA told us, if you have a gun in your home, it protects you. We did the tests, and we found out that not only does having a gun in your home not make your family safer, it increases the risk that someone in your family will be shot dead with a gun by 300%. It increases the risk of suicide by a gun to your family fivefold. So we found this out. This is part of what angered the NRA. But I think we need to find out what works and what doesn't. And we're not going to solve the problem by shouting from our opposite sides.
Hearing what you're saying. Before I bring in Paul, Craig, explain to us what the CDC is. I can see it in front of it. I want you to tell us.
Disease Control down in Atlanta, they were years ago, I think it was in the 90s, correct me if I'm wrong, they were given money to look into the reasons for gun violence, and I forget the administration that pulled the funding, but that funding is no longer there. And the NRA once again got their way. But look, it goes back to this thing about leadership. There has been a vapidity of leadership from both sides of the aisle on this gun question. You're absolutely right when you say there's no way you're going to take back all the guns in the United States.
And Paul was saying that you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Yeah,
Paul's absolutely right about that. But someone has to start getting tough. Leadership has to stand up like the President of the United States and tell them what the history is. They have to stop, sucking on the,
But Donald Trump's made it easier for people to get guns. He's changed the law regarding mentally ill people.
It's not even. It's there. In my opinion, as someone who knows firearms, there is absolutely no reason in the world for any American who's not a member of the military to have an AR-15 or any automatic weapon in their home, full stop.
Let me get Paul to react to that one. Paul, would you agree with Craig's statement?
I think for the most part, I would agree with Craig's statement. The only bad part there is if you look at the empirical data, Mark, 94% of active shooters have serious mental health problems.
How many
are not
percent?
Talking about an NRA member. 94%.
94%?
So you are not
scares me, sir.
94%. Well, it should scare you. We have 311 million Americans. 100 million are on antidepressants, and 30 million, or 10 million are on antipsychotic medication. So, you know what? The numbers don't lie. At the end of the day, I do agree in part. But the bottom line of this comes down to, and I say it over and over again, it comes down to foreseeability. And that's the issue we have to look at. NRA members are not the guys pulling the trigger here. They're not the women pulling the trigger here. Responsible gun owners are not the ones. We need to look at realistically. And I don't know who said it before. It was Craig or Mark. It was one of you guys that said, that you were regarding the NRA as representing big company. That's who the NRA represents.
Craig said that.
And that's a strong lobby. There's a lot of money. Craig, you were right. And a lot of money goes into that. And I do applaud what the kids are doing, as Mark said. I'm with you. I applaud that. But this is a much deeper issue in the United States.
Would you march with them, Paul?
And think you're going to change anything.
Would you march with them, sir?
I certainly would march with them, absolutely. I certainly would. No question about it.
OK, good on you. Good on you. I think that's the right thing to say, and I'm glad to hear you say that, sir. The Centre for Responsive Politics said the NRA spent $11.4 million supporting Donald Trump to get elected. Just throwing that in there to give you a little for instance. Mark, come back to us, sir.
Not surprised.
Tell us your feelings.
Yeah, I think the problem is bigger than mental illness, and we don't do a good job in this country in identifying people with mental illness, and we do a terrible job in getting them the care that they need. Absolutely, we should pursue that. But at the same time, we need to pursue other avenues, mindful of the fact that most violence in this country is not committed by people with mental illness, and most people with mental illness are never violent. So we have to be careful about stigmatizing them, but certainly we should pursue every pathway we can to identify high-risk individuals. Some states have started to do that. You can identify an individual at very high risk, an individual with a serious mental illness who's been confined because of harm to themselves or others, individuals who have threatened other people, individuals who say that they're going to go back and get a gun and come home and kill their family. We can identify individuals at very high risk, and we need to get guns out of their hands. This is one thing we need to do and test. When we can come back and show that this works, They're doing it in Connecticut. If we can study that and show that it works to reduce gun violence and to protect gun rights, then we can get legislators to support it. But we need to come back to them with the evidence. They're not bad people, but they don't have the data they need to be able to proceed.
Mark, thank you. We're running very short of time.
Thalidomide.
Go ahead, Vanessa. What would be the thing that you would change? One thing you would change? Because we want to see this situation end. We don't want to see children being shot in schools, regardless of which political party we represent. What would you change?
I think the mistake is to think that by changing one thing you will end this phenomena. And I think, again, it's a very larger problem.
What's the next step for the Republicans then? Because clearly people are pinning the blame on them.
Yeah, I think part of the work, be it Republican or not, it's stop the either-or kind of logics. We have to stop you're with me or against me.
Okay.
I think we have to think collectively, and that will be smarter for everybody.
Quick word from Paul before the end. Paul, you said you couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. I get all the guns back, but something has to be done, clearly.
Right. We need to embrace the reality of security, not the illusion of security, and we need to hold legislators accountable. End of story. If we can do those two things, the issues that my fellow panel members have expressed, we're in a highway towards getting that resolved. But until we look at both of those things, we're not going to get there.
Thank you, Paul. Craig Kapitas, final word.
Politicians have to stop taking the 20 pieces of silver from the NRA and the other manufacturers. They have to start telling the truth. The Republicans and the Democrats are equally responsible, and both parties better realize that these kids who are marching are going to be voters someday, and they're not going to elect anyone from either of your political parties if this continues. And unfortunately, marches don't stop anything in the United States.
It has marked their lives, doesn't it?
Continue.
It has marked their lives and will continue to affect them throughout their lives, and it's something they're not going to let go of, and I think they should keep hold of it. Craig, thank you. To all our panellists, thank you for joining us. We could talk forever, however, time against us. Short pause now. Media Watch is next. James Creedon joins us for the online reaction to our debate. Of course, lots of comment on social media, I imagine, regarding the issue of gun control.
Absolutely, Mark. We'll start with one tweet here by Bernice King, who is the daughter of Martin Luther King and the CEO of the King Center. My father was shot and killed, she writes. My paternal grandmother was shot and killed. Gun violence shatters lives and families. It is inhumane to be inattentive to and insistent in opposition to policies that could lower the number of incidents. Now, that's just one comment under these. You see hashtag gun control now, gun violence, a huge amount of traffic on this. And what's interesting to note, in fact, and Nate Silver is tweeting about this. This is not fading as a phenomenon. Usually you might expect, you know, as the days go by after a mass shooting or any incident, that the comment might fall away. It's actually sustained very much online on this issue. And one of the reasons is, as you were mentioning in the show, the role of students in this conversation.
They've been remarkable, they've been eloquent, right. They've managed to get through the shock, the grief, what they're feeling, and still say things that make a lot of sense.
That's right. And in the past, for school shootings, maybe parents would have spoken out, and now really students are front and centre in this conversation. And even op-eds in the New York Times, for example, one here that has been getting a huge amount of sharing, and the student herself wrote it. You can see here, if you have any, this is one quote from it, if you have any heart or care about anyone or anything, you need to be an advocate for change. Don't let any more children suffer like we have. And so it's pretty impressive to hear these testimonies, to read these testimonies.
Heartbreaking, isn't it?
That's right, how her best friend died in this incident. So these are people who have been really badly affected. The two most prominent students are Emma Gonzalez, who gave an impassioned speech over the weekend.
We heard from Emma a little earlier, yeah.
That's right, and she has vowed to change the law and told the crowd in that speech, we are going we are going to be the last mass shooting. So certainly they have high ambitions for the advocacy and the role that they're playing, but whether or not it will affect change is something we'll have to wait and see. The other kind of leading voice, if you like, is this guy here, and he is very active on Twitter as well. Cameron Kasky is his name, and you can see there #NeverAgain. That is also being used for a lot of comment in the conversation. And so he's retweeting people who are giving encouragement, saying we're not going to let you down. So they really feel carried by a sort of a sense of very important purpose.
Can I pause you?
Sure.
And forgive me, Vanessa, I'm going to put you on the spot. Doesn't this make you just want to ban guns? I mean, don't you feel, for the future of our kids, ban these guns? Because if they're,
Well, we know if we have a civil war, if we are attacked, we need guns. We can't let...
Yeah, an AR-15 is really going to stop a Sherman tank or a Soviet tank coming across the border.
But let me put a reasonable question. Isn't that what an army's for, to stop that kind of thing?
Well, the problem is what kind of army, what kind of policeman you have.
Oh.
There are actually comments. There's comments online that can go in that direction. But just before we get to that, the March for Our Lives movement, which has been essentially which has been carried by these students. You can see here Cameron Kasky sharing about it on his Twitter account. They're doing online fundraising for it. It's called March for Our Lives because it's taking place also in the month of March, next month.
March 24th.
So speaking of how sustained this conversation is going to be, these marches are going ahead March 24th. I mean, we're going to be hearing about this certainly into March and even into April, because there's a walkout planned by the Women's March Youth branch in Power on March 14th.
Go ahead, Craig.
And there's another on April 20th. So I'm just saying this
I just want to point something out here about gun culture in the U.S. The hippest guy in the U.S. now is this fella Elon Musk. Yeah. You've all heard of him. He's doing the cars. He's going to the moon. Do you know that Elon Musk is manufacturing your own personal flamethrower? Right? Okay.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not. You could look it up, as the man, as Yogi said. Look it up. He's manufacturing and selling a flamethrower, a commercially available flamethrower. What on God's... I have no idea. I'd like to ask him. Why on God's green earth would you sell a flamethrower?
See,
only in America.
Right. And so the way this conversation is going in terms of those defending the Second Amendment or saying, stop going for gun control, etc., is, well, I have some examples of it here. It's time to arm our teachers. That's one argument by students for Trump. And the idea being that teachers could then, if they had guns, I suppose...
shoot the kids who haven't done their homework.
What could possibly go wrong?
That's crazy, isn't it?
Take out the assailant. That's the logic.
I'm sorry, that strikes me as a crazy idea, but maybe that just says where I come from. I don't know.
And just one final comment going in that direction. There was a coach in the school, of course, who was one of the dead.
Yeah.
And some are arguing here, students as well, that if he had been armed, perhaps none of this would have happened. By the way, the NRA has not tweeted in 5 days.
James,
probably not an
thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all our panellists. Vanessa, thank you. Great to meet you. Craig, thanks as ever. Thanks to Paul Violis and Mark Rosenberg joining us from afar. And thanks most of all to you for watching. Continue to wrap via our website, via social media. Let's hear what you think. Stay with us. This is the France 24 debate. More to come here on France 24. Stay with us.